Shannon Petrovich with Therapist Talks, and I want to talk to you all this hour about all the things that you've written in over the past week since I announced the Q&A. So, okay, it looks like somebody can see me and hear me. So anyway, not to worry, we will get started and let's get going. Lots of people wrote in about different kinds of issues, mostly around narcissistic relationships. My channel is really about all kinds of mental health issues, but narcissistic relationships seems to have gotten the most attention, and so that's great. Okay, I'm glad the video just started. So you can pipe in with any kind of questions as we are chatting. And I'll start with the ones that were already sent in over the past week. So welcome. One of the things that a lot of people talked about was how they recover from narcissistic relationships and how they don't recover from narcissistic relationships. So how can I stop ruminating on the narcissist and justice? How can I stop comparing myself to the new supply? How can I stop sentimental thoughts about the love bombing time, the tendency to hold on to illusions and to feel like you're still obsessing about that person? That's really tough, I understand. And these are things that take time. But there are a lot of things that you can do to kind of help yourself with that process. The first thing is to really recognize the trauma bonding in action. One of the things that people have a hard time really understanding is that the time that happens from the beginning of the relationship through the course of the relationship is what we call the trauma bonding. And it's such a sinister and long process that happens, and it's really hard to recover from because you don't see all the changes as they happen. So when you first start in a relationship with a narcissist, then they throw all that love bombing on you. And so you're excited, you're happy, you feel cared about, you feel loved, you feel like they get you, they're mirroring, they're doing all this different stuff to kind of make you feel like you're the one and you're really special. And so as you get drawn into that, and as you experience that love bombing, you're going to stray away from who you know you are. You're going to stop doing the things that you used to do. You're going to stop hanging with the people that you used to hang with. You're going to even sometimes be isolated from family and friends, because a lot of the narcissists' tactics are to separate you and isolate you and become your everything. So the narcissist is an empty vessel that needs to fill up with other people. It's kind of a parasitical thing. And it's really hard to understand if you're not that person. If you're an empathic person, part of the problem is that you just don't get that that person is so empty inside and that they fill themselves up with you. So when you've been parasitically leached onto by that person, it's just so confusing. And like I said, so it feels really good, and then you start to get drawn in. The next stage is that devaluing, and they start to put you down and start to kind of say that they're really a big person for putting up with all these foibles. And we all have our own imperfections. So it's easy to say, oh yeah, that is true about me, or yeah, I'm kind of a pain in the butt that way, or whatever. So it's really hard to not take in that devaluing. And if you have kind of low self-esteem to begin with, then they can really zero in on all of those really hurt places in your heart. And in my experience, narcissists are incredibly good at finding that little hurt place in your heart and just hammering at it all the time, so that grows and your sense of self shrinks. Over time, they also will do these sort of tantrums and then withdrawals. And so when they tantrum on you, you feel like, oh my God, what did I do? This was such a perfect relationship and now it's broken and I must have done something wrong. And so over time, you're getting manipulated into feeling like you're the wrong one, you're a mess, they're so great for being with you, all these kinds of things. So over time, you start to undermine yourself. It's not just you being undermined by that person, it's you being undermined by yourself. And so the self-sabotage, the self critical thinking, and this even self-destructive thinking is really insidious. Then, as I said, they're isolating you. So part of the problem is that it's really hard to get yourself back when it's over, because you've kind of ceased to be primary in your own heart and soul. You've really become the backseat driver of your life. Somebody said, why I can't believe that I let him be my GPS. And that's such a great thing, a great way to look at it, because you let that person become your guiding force, and you let them run your life and your lives together. And it's just all kinds of stuff that's really, really hard to get over. So we call this the trauma bonding, because with these tantrums and then withdrawals, and then, well, I'll get back together with you if you A, B, and C. So then you comply and all of that stuff. So that becomes that trauma bonding. So that result in all kinds of things, including having a really hard time separating when it's over, having a hard time remembering who you were. And then the way we experience that is a tendency to hold on to those illusions about the love bombing, the tendency to obsess on that person even after they're gone. Well, why am I obsessing? Because that's been your obsession for a year or 2 years or 30 years or whatever it's been. So it isn't just now, it's really been going on for many, many years. And that's why it's so difficult. So what do? You need to rebuild your life from the inside out, from the very core of yourself all the way out. You need to stop those thoughts and stop those obsessions, because they're not healthy and they don't lead anywhere. So when people ask other questions, such as, how can I help my soon-to-be ex? I want to just say, stop. You need to not focus on helping your soon-to-be ex. You need to focus on helping yourself rebuild from the inside out. And even asking that question is indicative of how you're still really stuck in that headspace with that person. And you need to really pull back, start to take care of yourself. And whenever you start obsessing about that person or thinking about that person, you need to cut it off and back up and take care of yourself again. Because the more energy you put into that person, the less energy you have for yourself. And that's really difficult. It makes it really difficult for you to heal and move on. So Naomi is piping in with the same thing. How do you heal from obsessing about your toxic ex and ruminating? It's the same thing. So took the realization that you've been ruminating on this person for a long time. They trained you to ruminate about them. They trained you to obsess on them. So you're having a really hard time. It's almost like an addiction. And there is a book about love addiction. Is it love or is it an addiction? That's not really helpful, because it's so much bigger than that. It's the trauma bonding that they've drawn you into that makes it so that you were having to focus on them all the time. What are they feeling? When they walk in the door, what are they feeling? What kind of mood are they in? What do I need to say or do to get them in a better mood? What do I need to you're literally trained to obsess on that person, because it's not safe not to focus on what they're needing or wanting. So it's really important to recognize how insidious that is, how huge that was, and then to take care of yourself and cut off those thoughts and feelings and remind yourself, and then take some really active action. Go out for a walk, take a hike. Remember the things that you used to do some journaling, really important stuff. So let me see what people have been chiming in with, because I want to respond to the things that people are asking. Let's see. Dementia for the elderly. So narcissism in the elderly is really difficult. You might have been dealing with that person your whole life. I did a video on the aging narcissist and those who care for them, and that got a ton of views because I think that a lot of people are dealing with their narcissistic parents as they age, or their narcissistic partners as they age, or even a sibling. And this is a really difficult issue because they're not feeling so on top of the world anymore, especially with dementia or with any kind of aging. They just don't handle that stuff very well. They're not really good at handling disappointment or difficulty with their physical ailments. And so they are really demanding, they're really difficult, they're very angry a lot, and they're going to dump all their stuff on you. And then you're dealing with your own guilt or shame or whatever on how do I deal with this person. So I've done a couple of videos on how to take care of yourself and stand up for yourself with a narcissist, and also how to sort of emotionally detach yourself. So I call it the journalist method. And it's like, if you're a journalist in a, war zone, you're going to act like you're unflappable, and you're going to act like you're all there and you're okay, as you deal with this person that's all over the place. And especially somebody who's older or has dementia or dealing with, their anger or whatever. If you decide to stay and deal with it, and you don't have to, but if you do, you can sort of emotionally intact, and you're saying to yourself, I'm good, I'm okay. And then you watch as all the shenanigans go on. And it's all the same stuff that you've been dealing with your whole entire life. Yep. Oh, she always does that. Oh, he always does that. And so you don't take it personally, because it isn't about you. It's all about them trying to fill those empty holes and keep up that balloon. It's like a hot air balloon, and they've got to keep that hot air going all the time to keep the balloon inflated. And any moment that it doesn't get that inflationary gas, it collapses, right? And so the narcissistic collapse is that thing that we're always dreading, the implosion or the explosion. And we hate that implosion, explosion. And so we do a whole lot of placating and a whole lot of denying ourselves in order to prevent that from happening. And so to reverse that, again, we've got to go back to taking care of ourselves. And part of that is emotionally stepping back, even if you're in relationship with that person. Abandoned me after 30 years. It's taken 5 years to come out of a very dark place. Is it possible to have PTSD from abandonment? Absolutely. Because remember, you're not just letting go of that person. You are, you've geared yourself around that person for 30 years. You've taken care of that person. You've tried so hard. You've been through all the ups and downs, and then poof, it's gone. The trauma of that is that there's no that focus, and like I said, that complete focus on their needs, their wants, their emotions, everything like that has been everything. And so now you have to take care of you again. You have to even get to know yourself again. A lot of people coming out of these kinds of relationships don't even know themselves, and they have to really recognize, who am I? What am I about? What are the most important things to me? And this is where journaling and walking and praying and meditating come in, because we can really take care of ourselves and find out who we are and what we are about, and even find that we can be of service to other people in the broken places. Just had an interaction with a man this morning who had written in about his narcissistic abuse, and I encouraged him to find his voice and heal, and then help others with that. And he said he was already, which is great, because we find a sense of meaning and purpose when we help others. And we can do that and be stronger at the broken places. And that's just a really wonderful way of taking a horrible situation and making it meaningful and purposeful for others. So the love bombing was amazing. My mistake was moving to his state, leaving family, friends, and more. The name calling, yelling, threats started first, and then rages. So all of that stuff is really part of what happens, really sadly a lot. People tend to isolate themselves. Um, they're being isolated by the negative relationship, and that's one of the things. I'll sort of backtrack. One of the things that's really important to recognize is that these tactics are, I don't know if they're completely conscious, but they definitely are fairly conscious. So when they're isolating you, it becomes helpful to them to know that you have nowhere else to go. And so that their reality is your reality. If they give you a narrative and you are isolated from bouncing it off of other people, that narrative's going to stick. So one person asked me, why did they make up a lie about you and then try to insist that that's true? Well, this is one of the tactics that I don't know if it has a name, but it's partly gaslighting, but it's also controlling the narrative, if that makes sense. The narrative means that when there's something that's happened, they tell you what it was and how it was, and it can be you or your family is against them and they're the victim somehow. It can be just all kinds of gaslighting craziness. And that can be super crazy making. But it also, again, serves to isolate you, and then they have control. So it's important to recognize that all these games, the games the narcissists play, as I talked about in many of my videos, that those games are designed to control you, and controlling the narrative is part of how they control you. So lots of people dealing with so many of the same things. A covert narcissistic personality, that doesn't exist in the DSM. It's just something that people have begun to converse about, which is great. The covert versus the overt. Covert meaning more underground, more insidious. And I did a video called The Covert Narcissist, and I started it by saying, if a Navy SEAL team comes and attacks your position, you're definitely just as dead as if a bomber comes through and lands a bomb on you. I think in a lot of ways, people who deal with the covert narcissist are more blindsided than people who deal with an overt narcissist. You can kind of have a little bit more awareness of that overt because they're kind of blustery, boasting, and it's kind of more obvious. That covert narcissist plays the victim a lot. They control the narrative, and they're often playing the victim in many, many areas of their lives. A classic right now is Amber Heard, and I know a lot of you probably have heard about and are following that. Very, very shocking, her attitude towards Johnny, but the audios that have come out, not her attitude, but her actions towards Johnny, and how she constantly spins herself as the victim. And she has convinced a lot of people for a long time, and that Johnny was really so trauma bonded that he didn't defend himself. And I don't know where these audios came from necessarily. I don't follow Hollywood stuff a lot, but that's kind of intriguing because it is such about abusive relationships, and she is such a covert abusive person. I'm not going to call her a narcissist. She certainly has narcissistic traits. And again, the personality disorder versus traits has to do with diagnosing somebody. And obviously, I'm not going to diagnose somebody I've never even met, but certainly is displaying, her behaviors are displaying narcissistic traits, and certainly covert narcissistic traits, which means that it's very much underground, very much attacking from victim mode is what Pia Melody called it, which I thought was brilliant. Because if you've been attacked by that, you're always just so off guard. You don't understand, like, well, I'm a nice person, but this person is acting like I'm a terrible person. And I mean, it's just so confusing. So covert narcissism, narcissism is almost worse than, and in many ways more difficult to recover from than overt. Um, Obviously, I'm not going to compare the two completely because people have been through really terrible things with an overt narcissist as well. I totally lost myself, crashed when I had to accept everything was a lie. It's, yeah, it's a really, really difficult thing to recognize that this love bombing was not the real person. So a lot of people will spend an entire relationship, and sometimes, sadly, 30 years or more, trying to get back to the love bombing part, back to the way we were. There was no way we were. That was you getting manipulated and drawn in and hooked. And so really, if you see yourself doing that a lot, really try to step back and check yourself. Another person very wisely said in her question, am I hanging on to the illusion so that I don't have to feel the real pain and loss? Yeah, that's exactly right on. The feeling the pain and loss and the sadness and grief and going through all the grieving stages is really hard work. And it's very, very commonly known that we do a lot of what ifs and a lot of denial in order to avoid that kind of pain. And so a lot of those going back to the love bombing and going back to, well, what if I did this? What if I did that? Will make us feel better. And it doesn't ultimately, because we need to just grieve. And going no contact and taking care of yourself and regrouping and reconnecting with those people who loved you and knew you are parts of how you get better again. All right. Thank you for everybody for jumping in. It's really a little hard for me to read these things quickly, so I'll try to catch up. Let's see. Let me jump in on some of the other things that have been asked. Well, I like what somebody said. I engage in self-abusive thinking and actions. That's another really important thing to recognize, that it isn't any longer in the beginning as that person abusing us, but that then we take it on ourselves and we become abusive to ourselves. And so I'll have lots of long conversations with clients for sometimes months about really noticing how you talk to yourself inside your head. We talk to ourselves inside our heads about 40,000 times a day. I don't know who counted it, but that's what they say. So we're constantly talking to ourselves, and we can be kind and gentle and encouraging and caring, probably like we are to our friends, or we can be brutally horrible to ourselves. And if you think about it, 40,000 messages of brutal tearing you down are awful. So it's super important as you're getting out of these terrible relationships that you take care of how you're talking to yourself inside your own head. And this self-destructive thinking can keep you really depressed and down. Whereas if you take some time to, hang on, I'm going to get out of that. I thought I quit that. If you take the time to recognize what you're saying to yourself and recognize, man, I wouldn't talk to anybody that way. I would never talk to a friend who is down in that horrible way. And so then you got to, again, check yourself, begin to take better care of yourself inside your own head. And that's a really critical piece. It takes some time to heal that. But if you recognize that that is a really important part of how we get better, and you start to only treat yourself and talk to yourself that's the way that you talk to other people, and with the kindness and caring and empathy that you share with others, that will go a long way towards you feeling better about yourself. Self-compassion, self-care, all those things are super important. Let's see, the brain chemical changes make you addicted to this person, and you will go through withdrawals when you finally have enough and break away. Brilliant, Lisa. Thank you for that. That is a great segue towards talking about brain chemistry changes. So when we have trauma, which is defined by we ourselves, literally, I had my entire family was in the Bay Area during the big earthquake, and my brother's a geotechnical engineer, and he thought it was cool. And my sister was downtown in an underground office, and she came out, and there were cars with big boulders of the facade of a building sitting on top of them, and there were fires, and she was terrorized by it. And so here are two people from the same family, two siblings, and they completely experienced it differently. My sister had PTSD from it, and my brother just thought it was the coolest thing ever. So it's really important to recognize trauma is how you experienced it. So if there were constant explosivenesses in your life from this person, the adrenaline surges that go through your body that don't have enough serotonin to keep putting a lid on that, then there becomes a breakthrough of cortisol in the brain. And over time, we call that PTSD. And it's literally where you are, your brain becomes, the chemistry in your brain becomes out of whack. And it tears down your serotonin, which is our happy, serenity, I feel good, and I can roll with the punches, and I've got resilience chemistry. It tears down all of those things, endorphins and melatonin and GABA. So it just makes us raw. It makes us feel like we can't sleep, we're agitated, irritated, but we're exhausted. So it's like the worst of all worlds. And that's your actual brain chemistry. So healing from that is a physiological process as well, which means you need to do all the things that we know really help recover brain chemistry. Now, some people will need medications to reverse that, and those would be antidepressants, other kinds of things like that. For most of us, we can get better with healthy living. So we know that eating healthy, sleeping at night and being awake during the day, working out, sunshine, all of those kinds of things, and prayer and meditation and 12-step meetings and different things like that. We've actually shown in scientific studies that those improve your brain chemistry as much as Prozac. So always go to those things to maximize and optimize your own brain chemistry healing. And then if you need to, also talk to your doctor, because a lot of people do need that. So those are some of the things that that we've talked about. Another person that kind of dovetails on this: after negative outbursts, I lost my zeal and my creativity. And that's such a great noticing, because it's true. After those explosions, that shot of adrenaline recedes and we actually feel depression. So when people say, oh, I just am exhausted, I'm just depressed and blah, 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 that's true. You know, your brain chemistry, it's not you, like you're some, less than person. It's really the result of this chronic tantruming, chronic aggression, chronic fighting. It leaves you exhausted, it leaves you depleted. And so it's so important to recognize that and know that that's the truth. Okay, let's see what else we have. I'm very conscious of how I feel about myself and who I am. I really like myself and know it wasn't my fault, and he's the nut job. I'm way out of his league, and he knows that. So I'm glad to see that there's really some healing going on. It's so important. And what I love about what's happened is that, I threw out all this, and there's a community created here, and I love how you're supporting each other. I love how people will sort of begin this chat and begin to support and love on each other. So yeah, that's true. We have the ability to become who we were meant to be. I believe that there is a plan and a purpose for each of our lives. And when we lose ourselves, it's so very painful, because that's not who we're created to be. We were not created to be someone's doormat or someone's punching bag or someone's emotional punching bag. That's just a terrible way to live. And but when we come out of that fog and we come into the clear and we can start to see ourselves again for who we were created to be, and we can start to be ourselves, that's a beautiful thing. And I love that you all are supporting each other in that. Other family members, so somebody brought up having a daughter who triangulates and creates toxicity. That's a really difficult thing. You know, I did a recent video about having a son or daughter or son-in-law, daughter-in-law, and sadly in my practice I've had a lot of that come up, and so it's really important to recognize that this is a reality for a lot of people, and that when that's happening, it's the same thing, that you can be love bombed by that person, you can be manipulated, you can be controlled, you can be isolated, and even terrorized. I've known particularly mothers who were terrorized by sons, and that can be a really terrifying thing. And yet you feel guilty and responsible and all that other stuff. So we have to recognize that it's really important that the same of setting boundaries. Sometimes when you set a boundary, that person responds with respecting that boundary. And when they don't respect that boundary, then that's information. When they do respect that boundary, then you might be able to stay in relationship with that person if you keep those strong boundaries. And if you support them when they're being kind, caring, empathic, and respectful, and you disconnect from them whenever they're not. Because disconnecting from your own kid is a tough thing, but some people have to do that. And so it's important to recognize that that is what it is, and there isn't any way around that. My daughter twists everything I say to what she wants, and she drinks every day. She's trying to get my grandchildren to hate me. I'm so sorry, Angela. It's horrible. Again, there are only certain things that you can do. You can stay true to yourself, take care of yourself, be really clear with your boundaries. Don't engage in it. So sometimes when I'm working with somebody and we'll talk it through, and they'll say, well, and then I did this, and then I said that, and I'm like, okay, so you can't control anything that she's doing or he's doing, but you can absolutely keep your own side of the street clean. That's what we call it in AA, NA. So by that I mean that, you know, if you engage and if you get into a screaming match with your daughter, and I'm not saying you did, but those are things we can change. We can not get into and engage in any of that negativity. We can see their sickness and their unhealthy behavior for what it is and step back from it and not engage in it. Those are the options that we have. And oftentimes when we do that, not often, maybe 50-50, we can sort of save what we can from the relationship. And sometimes we can even maintain that relationship if we completely disconnect every time they have that behavior, and then we re-engage when they are being appropriate, empathic, caring, and sane. And that's a hard thing to do because you want to defend yourself, you want to get engaged and involved, and that's not that's not the best thing. You want to just literally see, oh man, she's going into that crazy place, or he's going down that road, and I know where that ends. And then just step back from it and say, well, I'm going to take off now, or I'm going to hang up now. We can talk later. When you do that and you just separate, it's almost like giving a timeout to a 5-year-old. And they're going to always throw that last really big tantrum just as they're marching down the hall to timeout. But over time, you're actually going to help them stop doing that tantruming because it doesn't get them anywhere. And if they need you, which they sometimes do, then they will re-engage with you in more appropriate ways because the negative engagement's not working anymore. gotten off of antidepressants and healing. That's awesome news. Thank you so much for sharing that. Don't let it take your faith, no matter how long it takes. Look up. God has you in his heart and hands. That's awesome. Thanks. I bet every person in the stream has asked to talk to the manager in a McDonald's. I'm not sure what that means. Okay. So when contact is unavoidable, I think that, like I said, the stepping back emotionally is one of the biggest parts. The second part is always boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. The difference between bipolar and NPD, so are completely different. Narcissistic personality disorder, if you want to know the 9 things, then you've got to have 5 of the 9, you've got to be diagnosed, blah, blah, blah. Those 9 things are behavioral primarily, and they describe a person's behavior. Bipolar is a chemical imbalance. So you can have bipolar illness and act in narcissistic ways, because mania is, you can have grandiosity, you can have rage, you can have irritability and really trolling, and then go into these crashing depressions. So typically, it's hard to tell it apart, but they're very different in their root causes. So if that makes sense. So sometimes a narcissist will be misdiagnosed as bipolar, and sometimes someone who has bipolar will be told they're narcissistic. What matters to me when I meet with somebody is how they are. I'm trying to get underneath, and I'm trying to see what makes them tick and what kind of belief system they're running on, and how their behavior comes from control and from manipulation and from having people puff them up, like I was talking about before, and then that narcissistic collapse. So is their depression coming from being angry and disappointed because somebody screwed up their control and their manipulation? Or is that crashing depression just out of the clear blue sky, which is what happens with bipolar illness? So figuring that out yourself from somebody that you're with is probably unrealistic, maybe. I don't know. But maybe from what I just said, you can glean some sense of where's this coming from and how does this usually play out. So differences between bipolar and narcissistic personality, they can look the same on the surface, underneath totally different. So think about one as the bipolar is a chemical imbalance that creates massive mood swings. And then think about narcissistic personality as a personality disorder, which means that the underlying belief system and behaviors that come from that belief system are really twisted. Not a diagnostic term, twisted. Talk about a mom doting on her son, and is that where narcissism comes from? So narcissism is a really complex thing, and a lot of people will talk about it being a chemical, hereditary kind of a thing. Primarily, I believe it's mostly how a person grew up, and that doesn't mean it's all the parents' fault, but it does mean that they may have had a genetic predisposition for certain things, but then primarily it is how they internalized the experiences of their childhood. And so 2 people can internalize experiences in completely different ways. For one person, abuse leads to these belief systems, and for another leads to those. And so a narcissist has a very different sort of belief system, and then they act on that continuously. And so a mom doting on her son can be a part of how you feed that beast. And I'll jump into another question that was asked, which is, what's the difference between normal teenage separation and development versus narcissism? And they listed off all the normal, obnoxious, horrible teenage behaviors. And so that's part of why we never diagnose somebody under 18, because, and I don't really diagnose somebody under 24 or 25, because you can't really tell what is behavior of adolescence and what is going to be a true personality disorder. And a personality disorder is very deep, entrenched, long-term. And so we can't say that of a teenager. All teenagers are very narcissistic. It's kind of part of their job in separating. They have to figure out who they are, and then they have to assert that, and they have to embrace it and figure it out and sort it out. They don't really mature and connect all the brain cells and connect the parts of the brain until they're about 24, 25. And so it's really hard to tell it apart. And the same things apply, like none of it's personal. So try to emotionally separate, set good boundaries, and walk away from the fight. Don't engage in the fight in the same way they are. If they're being explosive, don't be explosive back, because then you're just muddying the water and engaging in that. So it's really important to separate from that. So a couple of people asked, why does this give pleasure to a narcissist, and why would somebody treat someone this way? Again, try to not focus on that, because focusing your time on that is time and attention taken away from you healing you. So focusing on how do I help them, or how do I change them, or why does this give them pleasure, or why would someone treat someone that way? Recognize that they're wired differently from you. If you're an empathic person, and it is going to be hard to understand that, recognize that it just is, and it just is so different. It's like if you are a really honest person and you run into somebody who lies all the time, it's just almost out of your fathomability. And what you have to recognize is it just is, like they just are that way, and you can trust them to act that way on a consistent basis, as opposed to trust them with your heart and soul. And so when people say, well, I don't trust them anymore, I say, I trust them to keep acting the way they've been acting until I'm proven otherwise. So it's really critical to recognize it's totally different from the way you interact, and the way you think, and the way you feel. And you're not going to ever change that. You're not going to rescue them from that reality. You're not going to change it. Somebody did ask, is it possible for a narcissist to change? This video got a lot of reaction when I posted it. Theoretically, it is possible for someone to change. Hypothetically, it's possible for a narcissist to change. But by definition, they lack empathy. They lack the ability to recognize when things are they're doing. They lack the recognition. And they actually are involved in delusional thinking. A real narcissistic personality, part of the personality disorder definition is that their thinking is delusionally twisted in this way. Twisted is not the right word, but that they are delusionally set and entrenched in this thought process. And so by definition, they're not going to seek help. They're not going to stick with it once a therapist tells them the truth and confronts them on their behavior. And so are they going to change? No, not likely. Can they change? Sure, anybody can change. But it takes motivation, and it takes persistence. It takes the right therapist that's not going to tiptoe around them or get manipulated by them. And sadly, my profession is not great at this. We're humans too, and obviously we are an empathic bunch, and we wouldn't choose this line of work otherwise. And so we tend to get sucked in by really skilled narcissists. And so couples therapy is never recommended. If you're, I even heard a doctor that I work with, he's a psychiatrist, he said that it's pretty well accepted in the field that doing couples therapy with a narcissist is just teaching them how to manipulate better. And I would absolutely agree with that. When I've tried to work with someone who brings in their spouse who's narcissistic, you can tell it's just a mess. And when you confront that person, then they don't come back. And the only way they stay engaged is if they think that you're blaming their partner. So it's a train wreck. And if you are in an abusive relationship and you're trying to do couples therapy, stop. You cannot do couples therapy with an abusive person. You just can't. You are creating more problems for yourself and probably destroying yourself further. You need to stop. Set boundaries, get out, take care of yourself. Have I ever known a narcissist to change? I would say I actually have. Again, this is not in couples therapy. This is somebody coming in with some narcissistic traits, not on the severe spectrum, but on the more mild spectrum. I have definitely brought narcissistic traits up to somebody. As somebody pointed out today, I tend to be kind of blunt. And so I have an ability to sort of tell it like it is without usually offending somebody too severely. I've had to be extremely diplomatic in a lot of my work. I've worked with just a huge variety of people over the years. And so I am not going to pussyfoot around at anything, and I will directly tell somebody what's what and what I see. And I definitely have, oh, sorry, my audio is fading. I might be getting a little tired. As a therapist, 50 minutes is about all we got in us. So I'll be wrapping up in about 5 or 7 minutes. But anyway, I have been really direct and blunt. I have talked to people about setting boundaries. And I think sometimes if somebody is motivated, if there's a reason to, sometimes they can change. And so that's why people get mad when I said that they can change. Thank you so much for your videos. You're very welcome. Thank you, Spry. Let's see. Scott Peck's book, People of the Lie. That's a good one. Very good one. So I think, yeah, the empathic thing, how many have been cured? So I would say, this is a really interesting thing. There is some sort of really silly statistic out there that 4% of the population is narcissistic. I don't know how you would ever count that. The only way you could count it would be if you had a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a clinical social worker like myself having diagnosed all those people. But like I said, narcissists don't come into our offices unless they're dragged in by a spouse, and then they don't stay. And so it's so rare. I just don't know how anybody can come up with that fact or figure statistic. So anyway, I don't believe it. I think it is growing, sadly. I think back in the day, there were fewer and farther between, and I think they were typically kind of able to stay under the radar and abuse in their own homes and then look really good on the outside to other people. I think nowadays it's almost more accepted, and it's really disturbing. So I think that's not a valid statistic. Oh, let's see. Any other questions as we kind of begin to wrap up? Oh, I love this. I wanted to share this. Someone said, I decided to write down the things I longed for from the narcissist and give those things to myself. And I think that's wonderful. I think that when you can learn to take care of yourself, that can be just such a beautiful thing. And writing down those things that you wanted and you didn't get, and you're never going to get from that narcissistic person. That's really important. Pray to lift all the confusion and pain for all, and to heighten any information shared to start making that difference. Knowledge is power. It absolutely is. My ex is isolating our youngest and love bombing her. Oh gosh, new Jeep. These are really incredibly hard things. I would really encourage you to, I hope you have a therapist. I hope you can ask for psychological evaluations of each of you. And I think you will, if you have somebody decent, you should be able to have the narcissism brought out. But I hate how much, the abuse doesn't happen just at home and just behind closed doors. It happens in court. It happens in the public opinion, the court of public opinion, and all over the place. I just think it's terrible. How to manage teenage children when having to manage parenting with an NPD. How much truth can you tell the kids? So this is a tough one. Be careful. You need to, I really encourage you to listen mostly, and then teach. So you want to, and this kind of dovetails off of something else about raising non-narcissistic kids. So I think it's really important to recognize that self-esteem and narcissism are completely opposites. So a lot of people think that praising your kids is going to make them narcissistic, or that high self-esteem or narcissism is just like really high self-esteem that just went off the edge. Not at all. They're actually, narcissism and self-esteem are opposites. Real self-esteem comes from really recognizing who you are and what your values and character qualities are, not that your hair and nails are perfect, or you look perfect, or that everybody thinks you're awesome. That's kind of narcissism, okay? So real character and real self-esteem comes from the inside out, and that's really critical. So as you're raising your kids and teaching your kids, it's really important to recognize their character qualities. Don't recognize what they look like. Recognize and praise and shower them with praise when they're being empathic, when they're being caring, when they're doing the right thing, even though it would be easier to do the wrong thing. When they're recognizing in their friends what's right and wrong. When they recognize that one of their friends is using somebody and they think that's wrong, you give them a big thumbs up and help them. And then as you've done all that kind of work, then they're going to see their other parent more clearly. So you really don't want to be the person who tells them their parent is narcissist. You have to love them more than you hate their parent. So you have to also recognize that they are half that other parent, and they have a loyalty and a love for that person. So you want to support that, support their growth and development, support their love of their other parent even. And also when they come to you with that woundedness of, my other parent said this or did that or didn't show up for me, or kind of keeps focusing on these kinds of things, then you can come in and say, well, that's where that person and I differ. I really think that your character is what matters, and that these things are what matters, and showing up for each other is what matters. And so you're teaching, and you're gently kind of educating and teaching and supporting and loving on and listening for what woundedness they're bringing to you. And you're not sort of bringing your own anger, vindictiveness, or hurt or anything into the conversation, which is super tempting. It's really hard not to do that, but so important when kids are dealing with in the midst of a divorce or after a divorce. It's just so important that you not sever your own ties with them by being too angry about the other person. Any last minute questions? All right, I think we're going to begin to wrap up. I want to thank you all for watching. Please share it on your social media. This will be posted and will stay on the channel. And if you ever feel led to donate, that helps me to continue this work, but please don't if you can't. And working with criminal narcissists and sociopaths taught me. So when the NPD hurts the children, you absolutely are there to support them and love them. And I would also say, I like to, when I work with a lot of teenagers and young adults too, and when they say, did my parent not love me or whatever, I say, they may have loved you, but not have been very good at it. If they point out, well, she didn't do this, or he didn't do that, or this is the kind of thing that he said to me or she said to me, those kinds of things, I would say, I would, those aren't very loving things to say or do, because love is a verb. We have a really messed up thing in our culture to think that love is an ooey gooey feeling. Love's a verb. Love is an action. And when we are loved, we're loved. Like love is an action. I'm loving towards somebody, or I'm not loving towards somebody. So that's another important thing to teach our kids. If you feel that that person is being loving towards you, that is love. If they just say I love you after they just pushed you or punched you or said mean things to you, that's not love. So helping to educate them. If your parent is not acting in loving ways towards you, that I love you is really shallow. I did a video on what does a narcissist mean by I love you, and it's really, they're manipulating you or they're love bombing you. It's not real love because they don't act in loving ways. They're not empathic. They're not active in any kind of loving way. So anyway, we will start to wrap up again. I got going again. Sorry about that. Anyway, thank you so much for attending, and we'll try to do this more often if you think that would be a good idea. If you do, give me a thumbs up, and we'll try to do this more often. Thanks so much. Talk to you again soon. Take care.